Well, hi, everybody. I'm Ryan with Drive Commerce. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about when empowered customers begin to outgrow your e-commerce stack. I think it's probably no secret that today's customers expect personalization, customization, instant gratification. We talk a lot about the empowered customer, and this is going to be kind of the modern customer who has access to information, multiple devices, and probably data that rivals the data that we have in our own systems about our own products ultimately. But the other half of that story, besides kind of the customer being so empowered, is that there's a lot of growing retailers or mid-market retailers who start to realize that their tools can't keep up. And today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like and how to diagnose it and then what to do about it. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the empowered customer. So who is that empowered customer, right? This is the modern customer. They have access to tools that we could only really dream about, a few years ago, right? They're cross-device. They are using tools like large language models and other AI-based tools that go beyond kind of simple browsing and buying, but to an entire shopper journey that's driven kind of out of our control to a certain degree. And so they're looking for certain things that really speak their language. So they're looking for things like comprehensive visual tools for shopping. Again, they're cross-device, right? So they want visual data that's easy to ingest on a small screen or a big screen. They demand immediate feedback on their product choices and decisions, and that's all the way from the kind of inspiration on social media that the social proof is there that says this is a popular product or this is the right solution for you, all the way through the buying process to order status and delivery. They're looking for data and reassurance that their choice is the right one, right? Friction-free experience is also kind of expected. And that goes, again, from all the way through the initial inspiration through the final delivery. They want to be inspired by the shopping journey that they've taken and then gratified with their purchase. And any annoyance or gap in that understanding is going to be an opportunity to lose the attention of that empowered consumer, right? Because they are probably have a few of these shopping journeys going on all at once, and that yours is not going to be the only one that's on their mind. So it's very easy to lose their attention span, especially if you have some of these gaps and annoyances that they might see. Again, this is all foundational to these users, right? They're sophisticated features, but they aren't optional from a certain point of view. And ultimately kind of taking a step back, when we talk about the baseline expectations of this empowered consumer, what we're really talking about is a shift when your company is growing from your more niche kind of base customer into that more mainstream consumer who is empowered and does have these tools, right? So you'll see this a little bit as you shift from your kind of like niche customer who's willing to forgive a few annoyances or get over a couple of gaps, but they may find that you may find as you expand your customer base, you're running into more people who are more kind of professional shoppers almost, right? They're seeing your product because of a marketing campaign or something like that, or organically, and they're coming to your brand to kind of find out more about it, and they want you to speak that language to them. And so the way I like to visualize this, or the way I like to think about that is, this says, hey, these are baseline expectations. The other way to think about that is that, if you're not presenting your options in a language that these consumers can recognize and what they expect, you're not literally speaking their language. Like, you're just literally not speaking the same language. So I think they say like, it's in English, the adjectives come before the nouns, right? And then in certain languages, adjectives come after the nouns. If you start describing something as like a shoe black small, someone's going to recognize that you're not speaking their language, right? And so there may be a loss of communication there, a loss of clarity, a loss of trust in some ways. And that applies to the language that you're using visually as you present your products as well. I don't know, you can go back. So let's talk a little bit about the requirements for the empowered customer, right? Visuals I talked about being important across devices, especially. We work a lot in customization and personalization, and being able to accurately preview exactly what the product is going to look like is super important to these customers. And again, cross-device. They are looking for real-time feedback and updates, and this is where AI, seems to really fill a necessary gap in the market, because we're looking at the ability to answer questions in real time and give that feedback. But the quality of the data has to be there, right, in order to kind of fulfill on that promise of getting accurate information to these customers. And so I think that there's a certain amount of wariness on the consumer part to engage with these types of tools, even though there's been sort of a leap forward in their ability to kind of process information and deal with the different kind of decision trees that they might have to go through in order to answer a customer support question. Which again speaks to the seamless experience from inspiration to delivery, right? We're looking at consumers who are coming in, again, very empowered, cross-device. They're looking at different information sources that we don't necessarily control. And we want to provide the most seamless experience possible when they're on our site, right? Allow them to kind of slip through that funnel and kind of get through to where they want to go. Fulfillment accuracy compared to front end is another one. So this is a big one where if you are experiencing, as you're growing, right, as you're presenting new options, coming up with new colors or materials or ways to present your product, you may find that the quality control isn't there. And this is where empowered consumers can really do damage to your brand if they're receiving products and it doesn't look anything like what they spec'd, right? Ultimately. And so this is where it's really important to kind of have your tools that are talking to each other. If you're existing in this sort of like DIY or plugin space where it's difficult to get information out of those tools and be able to display it in things like confirmation emails, or even in the front end when the customer is doing their design work, or looking at the products in general, the fulfillment accuracy, the visibility, the being able to compare those two things is really, really important as well. And then this last one, I think, is maybe the most important and somewhat underlooked generally, or overlooked generally, I should say, which is the being able to scale regardless of your organization size. And I think that this is where there's real wasted opportunity for growing brands or brands who are kind of entering that mid-market space, where you may see spikes like this in your data, right? You may see the start of this where your product gets involved in a TikTok trend, or you're featured on Good Morning America, or you just have a new marketing campaign that's working really well and you're seeing good volume from that. When we look at the empowered customer, they're coming in as part of these waves. You're getting plugged into that mainstream kind of consumer behavior. And when you get that, if your systems can't keep up with the peak of that demand, and suddenly there's server errors, or orders aren't getting through, or that kind of thing is happening, unless they're dedicated to your brand, they're going to wander away, and you're not going to be able to take advantage. These spikes are really the opportunity that you have to set a new floor for your business, either attention or revenue wise, right? And you want to be able to take advantage of those spikes, fulfill on them, and that gives you kind of the hero story of being able to sustain that trend, or sustain that spike, and that will continue to resonate with people, can create that echo effect that you're looking for in the marketplace. So I've been hinting at this a little bit, but DIY and lightweight tools are a great place to start, but ultimately they can start to hold you back as well. I think when you're running a growing business, especially in e-commerce retail, this type of graph can be very familiar, where you'll see costs increasing, you'll see visits and kind of the attention that your business is getting increasing also, but revenue, where it may be sort of trending up, doesn't really follow the same pattern as the kind of costs and the sessions increases that you're seeing. And this, I think, is kind of a telltale sign that you're starting to engage a lot more with those kind of empowered customers, right? They are looking for more from your business in order to kind of fulfill on what they understand to be the language of how they do business online, right? And so when you start to see things like order errors or fulfillment issues, that can be a sign that customers are expecting one thing and you're not fulfilling on those expectations. This can lead to support teams who are overwhelmed, especially with manual edge cases. As you start to see more manual edge cases creep in, that can be a sign that there's friction between how your business views what it does and how the consumers who are on the other side kind of view what your business does, right? Or what their expectations were for that. If you're feeling a limited ability to innovate within your current tool set, that can be a really great indicator that you're sort of outgrowing the stack, right? Like you may see market opportunity to fulfill, group orders is a hot one right now that I think a lot of retailers are considering or trying to look at. How do we get further into that B2B space, right? And be able to serve kind of the middle area between like an individual order and something that's, kind of more on the broader corporate scale. If your tool set doesn't allow you to kind of innovate or move in a direction like that, that's holding you back, right? And so those are kind of areas to look for that friction as well. I think unexpected per piece or overage costs rising monthly. This is going to be one that everybody who has, migrated to Shopify is going to feel at some point. I think just about every plugin you find there from an e-commerce perspective is looking to extract a percentage or a per piece cost in terms of, just how that marketplace grew up, right? That's kind of the norm over there. And I think as you start to see businesses who were previously kind of niche migrate into a more enterprise level, kind of widely accepted, again, speaking the language of the mainstream consumer solution, like a Salesforce or a Shopify, and especially on the Shopify side, you're going to see them get surprised by how that scale, is eaten up by some of those kind of per piece or percentage costs that you find a lot of the times. And then, I think having an inability to kind of customize or present your brand identity throughout the experience, right? We see this a lot, again, going back to just Shopify plugins in general, kind of you put everything together and you put together the flow that you're looking for, but ultimately there are pieces of it where, maybe navigation is inconsistent or some of the design language is inconsistent just because you're kind of putting this together from a few different designers' perspectives and a few different plugins. And those gaps can be felt, especially by the sort of empowered consumer who's used to looking at checkout experiences or shopping journeys that, kind of conform to what their expectations are. When they notice these kinds of things, that trust level maybe ratchets down a little bit, or when they experience those gaps in the kind of the brand identity or the design language, they feel that gap in communication with your brand a little bit too. So if this looks familiar, I think it's a sign that you're kind of in that space, and you may want to start exploring, those mid-market solutions, or at least kind of how do you step up. And I think another really obvious place is once your products are really starting to gain complexity. And we see this a lot with our clients, just in terms of looking at, how do we expand our product offering without having to literally go out and get, a totally new product line or, completely new tooling or something like that. When you're looking at, in our space, we do a lot, like I say, a lot with customization. The visual customization is just one layer of that, right? Like being able to produce the pictures and kind of show where things go on the product, that's one layer of it. But being able to communicate that down to fulfillment and have the appropriate pick sheets or product fulfillment instructions available, whether that's for humans or machines to read, is super important in terms of being able to grow your product line, because we find in so many cases that manufacturing partners or even just the tools themselves, in the case where we have brands who are manufacturing their own products, the tools themselves have capabilities that are beyond what's offered on the front end, right? And so it's being able to creatively deploy what you have available and remove that bottleneck on the front end to say, hey, let the customer loose on everything this machine can do, right, with our product, and let's see if we can kind of widen that net and get a few more people to purchase, especially things like custom product, which have a little bit of an additional margin built in and things like that. And so integration is another big piece of this, right? Like anytime you're kind of bringing something into your stack, as you're entering this sort of like growth mid-market phase, I think it's really important to consider how nicely does it play in the sandbox with everything else, right? Does it integrate with your platform, your ERP, your OMS, your PIM, your warehouse management system, whatever you're using, whatever mission critical software you have that you say, hey, we're not changing this, right? This is something that we really, really need. I think it's important to understand how each new piece will play with that total puzzle. And then the ability to scale horizontally, this goes back to that kind of spiky graph I was talking about before. but also, it plays into the ability to, again, add new product lines. So can you just, kind of copy and paste and set up a new product line with the tools that are available to you right now? As you're gaining new abilities in fulfillment and manufacturing, what are you able to effectively do in the front end to represent that kind of stuff? We just saw here the kind of augmented reality preview going by, and I think that's another important question to ask is like, how do I get some of this data integrated into future technologies like AR, like MCPs for large language models? How am I going to be able to grow with this technology into the future? And I think you'll find that these capabilities rarely exist in the sort of like plug and play or plug-in solutions that are, kind of designed, targeted at the both the SMB market and kind of the down market from there. It's just important to ask questions like, how do we integrate this going forward and how we're going to use it? And kind of on that note, empowering your team is going to be just as important as empowering the customer, right? So we've been talking a lot about the customer expectations, this consumer who is cross-device and has access to, AIs that are doing shopping for them. Like, they have expectations. They're expecting you to speak a language, but how can your team also be empowered to speak that language, right? And so again, the signs you're looking for really are like, maybe your product managers are looking for a way to manage complex configurations without dev time, right? And this is always kind of a friction point of, especially in homegrown systems where there's always a guy, right? There's always a Jeff or a Pete, and somebody's got to go to him to get things done in the middleware and in the site or somewhere within that stack. And I think anytime you're kind of seeing this behavior, that's an important time to ask yourself, like, is this platform really serving us, or is this holding us back? Is this becoming a bottleneck because we have no way to empower our team to create the things that they want to create for our customers, right? Maybe your operations teams are looking for more clean or structured data for fulfillment. And I think this one's, a classic kind of plug-in issue where, oh, we only offer one output. There's only one type of output. It only comes in CSV, or it's only in PDF, or it's only in XML. Not being able to interface with other systems and kind of play nice in the sandbox, I think is a telltale sign that, when your operations team is saying, hey, we need more data, we need different data, we need it structured differently, and we can be more efficient that way. That's a really important flag to understand and to kind of say, hey, this is a time where we maybe need to change the way that we're delivering data, or look at our stack and how these things are flowing through, because we have a bottleneck and some new opportunities here. And then I think marketing is another classic one. Whenever you have your kind of marketing team is held up by either waiting for static assets, where is the landing page going to live? What is the product called? What does it look like? Whenever you're doing those kind of like manual SKU builds and that kind of thing, if you don't have that ability to scale those dynamically without creating some kind of nightmare on the back end, that's another opportunity to look at, empowering your team with the ability to say, yeah, we're confident in our marketing calendar that these are the launches, this is the product, and these are where the things are going to line up. So all that to say, the mid-market squeeze is a real thing. We've been talking about being able to empower your team, empower the customer, and ultimately, like, if you're in this growth phase or in this mid-market phase, you have the budget for scrappy workarounds, but your requirements are starting to build up and point toward enterprise software licenses, right? And you're just somewhere in between those things, and that's okay. You're not alone. Obviously, there's solutions that are out there that are aimed to kind of help you bridge that gap from a mid-market perspective. Just to kind of illustrate what it looks like to graduate, from good enough, I wanted to kind of talk about PopSockets quickly. They had found success on a homegrown platform with their customization, but they were really looking to kind of take it to the next level, right? So they had worked with a local dev shop. They were basically running it on a web server located in Boulder, but that ultimately made the global markets completely inaccessible, right? Because they were not going to be able to do this on the small scale infrastructure that they had. Translations and being able to serve those markets through payment providers and things was just a non-starter at this point. And from their partners' perspective, they were a dev shop. They're looking to fill retainer hours, essentially, right? And so they are looking for a very long-term commitment to a full project scope with this tool, and a very rigid kind of go forward plan from there. And when PopSockets was looking at like, okay, how do we, sort of take this on ourselves or use a plug and play solution? The per unit charge at their scale and their kind of price point was just a non-starter as well. And so where do they go, right? Where, they're kind of finding they're outgrowing their current solution. They have essentially a 30% increase in revenue stream available in the US and 100% of this global customization revenue sitting on the table being held up by a solution that's aging and kind of getting older by the minute, right? But they can't go anywhere because it just the economics don't make sense. And so we were able to help them kind of unlock that revenue stream in 90 days. But going beyond that, we became a core aspect of their marketing and kind of go-to-market strategy, both through special editions that we're able to support through our product, as well as AI-driven art that we have integrated with them as well, and other things of that sort. And so what this story, the reason I bring this up as an illustrative case study is because what we want to communicate here is really that, going beyond just a revenue channel, if you have something that's just kind of being served by a plugin or a DIY sort of solution at this point, you may be reaching a point where you're sort of bottlenecked by that solution. It's been a great start. It may be it's a great way to get going, but it might be a good time to look at, how would we transform our business around this tool if we could do everything that we wanted to with it, right? How could it become kind of like a big part of our brand identity, especially when it comes to customization and personalization? And kind of continuing on that note, I also just wanted to highlight Ridge quickly as well, thinking about kind of like when custom becomes a core part of your brand identity. So they obviously have established themselves in everyday carry with, wallets, especially rings, and moving to luggage as well. But they started on, they, came from Shopify, right? They're homegrown on, they're grown on Shopify. They kind of live in the plugin ecosystem, but eventually they found that really kind of the poor mobile experience that the plugin that they were using was offering, highly developer dependent updates. They were really kind of like leading the development of this and pushing this plugin to do things and then having to customize around it when they couldn't. And then, really the manual SKU management for a tool that wasn't designed at scale to be able to handle the number of things that they were putting into the system now, right? Like they're growing. They want to be able to customize rings, customize luggage, do everything in their system the way that they want to, and having to go back to the well every time with development and manual SKU management was just not cutting it for them. And so, through our system, they were able to implement not only better visuals, so, looking here at like kind of the 3D visualization and the ability to kind of preview all of the changes, but also their own team gained the ability to manage a lot of this configuration themselves. And so they can now have direct control over the rules and pricing and the workflows that are available in this, to the customer. And the fun story we like to tell with these guys is that on the launch day, the incremental customization revenue paid for their platform fees on the first day. I think even probably around noon or something like that. So really half a day. And just kind of a fun story to share, to say like, hey, there are ways out there to kind of grow without having to fork over a percentage of that growth all the time, right? And to kind of carry the business forward. So anyway, all that to say, really, it's not just about the front end anymore, right? When you're feeling these kind of friction points, when you're trying to grow from good enough into kind of having a core brand identity that really speaks to the personalization, the individual nature of your brand, you have to recognize the e-commerce landscape has also matured, right? So all of the visualization, all of the kind of like front end piece of it is essential, but it's not sufficient. And when you're feeling some of those friction, when you see those gaps and you can kind of feel the friction between those areas, it's a sign that you've probably outgrown your stack, and that's a good thing, right? Like we want that growth, but we also don't want to wait for failure points to become systemic. We need to step up and meet the customer where they already kind of expect us to be. And so when you start feeling those friction points, really address them and look at this, from a strategic perspective and say, how is this impacting our business, and what could this look like if we kind of turn this on its head and use this as an asset instead of a liability? I think I saw a couple of questions come in on the chat, so maybe we can kind of run through those with the last couple of minutes that we have here. See if I can pull up the Q&A. So how do I know if my customers are already looking for these enterprise features? I think that's a great question. I would say look in your data, right? When we look back at that graph where we have kind of visits and costs are rising, but our conversion and our revenue are kind of staying, flat to up. That's when you're starting to see, potentially customers who are looking for that. That's at a broad scale, right? I think you have to look at individual processes as well and look at the metrics within those to see where that might be happening. And some of that's just going to be your intuition, right? Knowing your business, I think you probably have a better point of view on where to start looking, but ultimately you're looking for those metrics where, expectations weren't met, right? So that's bad reviews, that's high bounce rates, that's poor conversion rates, that's maybe high call volume on the support side for certain, if you can segment that by product or by product type, that can give you a lot of insights, I think, as well. At what point, revenue or order volume, do DIY tools usually start falling apart? Boy, that's a really good question. And I think I would go back to, I mean, unfortunately, I'm going to give the consultant answer and say it depends, right? But ultimately, it's all relative to your business, right? And I think if you have a high point for your business, right? If Black Friday comes and you have a great deal and you get featured and you get a ton of traffic to the site and your tools are able to hold up to that, then I would say you're at a comfortable place because your spikes are not breaking the tools. If you are at a place where whenever you see a spike in traffic or pretty on a regular basis, when you see a spike in traffic, your tools kind of fall apart and collapse and that spike maybe ends a little bit sooner than it could have, I think that is a really strong sign that you're outgrowing your platform because you're sort of like maximum that you want to do. Your maximum business is breaking the system, right? And those are your growth opportunities. Again, that goes back to like being able to set that floor a little bit higher. I think that's a critical opportunity you're missing out on. And if it's happening every time, if it happens once, I think you're probably starting to outgrow your platform. How do these case studies carry over to other industries like apparel or home goods? Yeah, no, that's a fair point because I think both of those are kind of like accessory, kind of everyday carry. But I think that, a lot of this translates as well. I think about the furniture space a lot, right? We've got a couple of clients in that space. Visualization is so huge there. And I think the accuracy of the visualization is maybe even more important because when we're looking at like, kind of accessories, we're looking at a very detailed look, but something that's a little bit more macro like furniture or even apparel to a certain degree. You're going to have a more zoomed out look, but maybe, some need to look at the detail as well. So anyway, I would say a lot of this applies even more. And you want to look at these case studies, again, thinking about them from the perspective of growing from a niche customer into that more mainstream kind of empowered customer. And the friction you're going to experience because of that is going to show up in some of those really specific failure points. So I would, I think visualization would be huge for furniture, especially, probably the ability to increase SKU count. So add new components and materials and things like that. That would be another big one. And then I would look at, kind of the your conversion rate and how that gets affected when you bring people in from a more kind of mainstream channel like a sale or kind of social organic or something like that. Anyway, I think we're at time today. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming to the webinar. If you have some feedback for us at the end, please feel free to reach out, sales@drivecommerce, or come to the website. And if you have questions afterward, please let us know. So thank you so much, everybody.